hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestel.
And this is the show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 202, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul Bestel, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm surviving the Arctic blasts as they've decided to usher in autumn with a random snowfall in mid-November. But we've got through it by stealing all the milk and bread from our local shop.
I hear that serves as a fine bulwark against the cold, milk and bread.
It's an English tradition. Any snow forecast, you must storm your local shop or supermarket and buy as much milk and bread as you possibly can carry.
So it makes sense to me. Prepare for the return to the Middle Ages. This is the
great English tradition. It is the English way. Absolutely, my friend. But other than that, it's been a strange week, really. It's been quite sad in the British paranormal scene, I suppose.
Of course,
after the sad and shocking news that we essentially lost our Art Bell on Saturday, which has left a lot of people stunned because I think nobody knew he was that ill. And that's the sad thing about it.
Of course, we are referring to Howard Hughes, host of the long-running show, The Unexplained.
Yes, The Unexplained on TV and podcast. 808 episodes he'd released over the years. And,
of which I was one.
Yes, you were. Yes,
yeah.
You'd been a guest.
Actually, of all the press I ever did for the book, Howard was undoubtedly the best prepared person. I feel so grateful to have had the time to talk to him because he showed me what it's like to really care about what you do and to think critically about every guest. Like he asked me questions, in-depth questions that no other interviewer has asked me. And not like gotcha questions, but just genuine questions asking my opinion on things in a way that was thought-provoking and unlike anyone else I met.
Yes. I mean, I've never spoken to him in person, but we'd communicated regularly. And I remember I reached out to him for some advice at the beginning, and he was very kind with his time. And the last thing he said is, "I wish you the very best of success, but I hope you're not that successful," with a little smile, which I thought was very sweet. But it's very strange because he was probably the first podcast I really dove into fully because my brother introduced me to it. So I've been listening to him since about 2010.
Oh, wow.
And the amount of people, the amount of friends I've made who have been on his show, like Ruth Roper-Wilde, Paul Sinclair, Tony Healy, Stan Gordon, lots of people from the States that I've spoken to over the years, lots of the British UFO fraternity. They're very similar circles. So, like I say, it was such a surprise because it's been a very strange year because he just stopped releasing episodes and said he had to step back for a while. And he'd had some issues with tinnitus and things. And so most of us and most of the community just presumed that we were just waiting for him to come back. And then there was a brief update in the summer saying he wasn't fully fit, but he was hoping to be back sooner than later. And then all of a sudden we just got this notification on Saturday from his colleague who runs the website for him and also one of his close friends. And they both announced that he'd passed away the previous week. And announced it. So it's left a big hole, like I say, because he was our version of Art Bell. And so to have lost two great paranormal broadcasters in just 7 years is quite shocking, I suppose.
Well, my friend, I'm not exaggerating and I'm being disingenuous when I say this, but I'm glad they have you because I think you are the heir apparent to that throne. You are that caliber of broadcaster. And, I'm just glad you are still there. Someone has to keep that flame alive.
Absolutely. I think most of us who work in this field will continue. And I've said many times in the past, Art and Howard have both been massive influences on me in regards to how well versed they are in certain subjects and preparation and trying to be friendly. I know Art could be a bit spiky at times. There are many interviews where it's basically a 2-hour argument.
Sure.
But fair play to the guests sometimes for sticking around. Yeah. Good, it works on all sides. But Howard was probably a top quality gentleman, both on and off air. And, there are plaudits pouring in from many luminaries of British broadcasting. So I think that I'm sure he'd be touched by how much people have been pouring their hearts out this week about everything. And it's a legacy I think all of us yearn for, really, to be remembered as fondly when we decide to move on.
Absolutely, my friend. I couldn't agree more. And so this episode, consider this dedicated to the memory of the late, great Howard Hughes, host of The Unexplained, a gentleman that this industry will miss a great deal. And that episode, we're going to be, I really wish we had a UK-centric episode. However, we do not. But we do have an Australian-centric episode for Howard. And we are going to be talking on this episode about the haunting of Queensland. Of course, yes, a return to Australia. I know I feel like we were talking about doing this. We had a story from here on the episode we did with Sinead, but we haven't done a full-on Australia episode in a while. And for the folks who don't know, and because, it's not necessarily common knowledge, but Queensland is the second largest of Australia's states. It is the third most populated. And I didn't know this, Paul, but I was looking up some Queensland facts as I was putting together the script. It is bigger than all but 16 countries.
Yes, it's massive.
It's 1.7 million square kilometers. It's crazy.
I mean, the worrying thing is, like you said, it's it's not even the biggest state in Australia.
No. It is the sixth largest subnation state or subnational area. So like basically the largest area that's not a country. It is the sixth largest, behind only 5 others, one of which is from Australia.
Yes.
That is, Western Australia is the second largest. The 2 on either side of it are Russian. There's Sakha and Krasnoyarsk, and then Greenland, Nunavut, and Queensland. So on this episode, we are going to be telling stories from that great state, along with some fun little tidbits I found about just weird towns in Queensland, not necessarily haunted, but just weird. Because when you have that much space, things are going to get weird. This is sort of a truism of no matter where you go. Anywhere like in Canada, especially back out west, where I grew up, you get those little towns in the middle of nowhere and you think, nothing good happens here. Nothing good is happening here.
And if you've seen Razorback and Boar, once you realise what Australia's like outside of the major cities, you can understand how giant mutant pigs could be running amok in the outback and nobody would know.
Oh, man. I just quickly, before we go to the patron shoutouts, I was in Toronto a couple weeks back to go see the Canadian premiere of the Street Trash remake. And it reminded me of, do you remember the Australian film Body Melt?
Yes.
I couldn't help but think of Body Melt, and it made me think that no matter where you go in Australia, whether you're in the outback or you're in the suburbs, nowhere's safe.
Well, I learned all I knew about how to be safe in Australia after watching those Mad Max documentaries.
There you go. And if you need any additional education, you've got the 2 Wolf Creek films.
And Lake Mungo. Oh yeah, Australia. It's a scary goddamn place, and on this episode, we're going to prove it to you. But first, we're going to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, the tourism department of Queensland paid me a great deal of money not to do an Australian accent right here. So instead, we're just going to say we could not make this show without you. So thank you. And while of course we'd like to thank all our patrons, we would especially like to thank our latest patrons. They are
Kira Lee Johnson,
Natalie D,
and Tracy Barnett.
Again, thank you so much. We cannot tell you how much we appreciate our patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers. Every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. But folks who support us with their cash as well, you make a real substantial difference in our lives, and for that we are eternally grateful. And while we'll wait till the end of the show to tell you about all the cool stuff you get, we will say for $1 a month over at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, you get an ad-free feed. Who doesn't want that? Ads suck. Again, if you want to support the show, click the link in the show notes or head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or subscribe to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with The Haunting of Queensland.
The Mimic. I'd like to preface this story by stating that I'm a very analytical person. I'm a technical business analyst, for God's sake. So my job is to analyse and find the reasoning behind every situation. But I'm at the point where I can't deny that something is living in my family home, and it imitates my mum. I live in Queensland, Australia, and back in about 2004, we moved into a very old Queenslander home. A big fixer-upper with very high ceilings and a beautiful deck that caught that summer breeze perfectly. It was the first house built in the entire street over 150 years ago, and was used to be a celery farm. About 15 years ago, my cousin was sleeping over one night, and she told me all about her paranormal experiences. For context, she grew up in Indonesia, and her mother was apparently into black magic, so she has seen and experienced a lot of the paranormal. "Is there anything in my house?" I asked her. "Yes," she replied. "She sits on the windowsill of your mum's room." "Is it bad?" I asked, not too sure if I actually wanted to hear the answer. "Just don't bother it," she said, shutting down the conversation. Fast forward a few years, and I was sitting on my bed studying with the door open. I then see my mum walk down the hallway with a washing basket, about to put on a load of laundry. About 5 seconds later, I see her walk down the hallway with a washing basket, going in the same direction that she was before. I was baffled. How could she walk the same direction twice? I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was studying and it was very late. About a year had passed and I'd forgotten about this spooky incident of my mum walking in the same direction twice. It was a Friday afternoon and I had my best friend over and we were just hanging out in the kitchen talking to my mum. She was cooking dinner and me and my friend were just chatting away. My brother then just appeared from his room. "Where's dinner?" he asked. "Oh, it's still another 30 minutes away," my mum replied. But you just came into my bedroom and told me that dinner's ready." We all froze still. Silent. Chills ran up the back of my spine as I remembered the incident that happened a year prior. "No, I didn't," Mum responded. "Yes, you did," my brother exclaimed. "You knocked, opened my door, walked into the room and told me that dinner was ready." I could vouch for my mum that she hadn't done this. After all, I was with her the entire time. My brother shook his head. "Perhaps I'm imagining things," he said, and walked back into his room. I knew he wasn't imagining things. From that point on, things got weird, but only for me. My brother never had another experience, and neither did my mum. My placid dog, who was a big fat golden lab, would jump up from her sleep and growl and bark at the corner of the room. Doors that closed would open up behind me, and always I felt that something didn't want me there. Move forward a few years, and I'd moved out of home and was asked by my mum to dog sit while she went away for the weekend, which I did. It was a hot summer night and I was in the spare bedroom with the air conditioning on, freezing cold. Then, at the exact time that the air conditioning unit turned itself off, my phone went to Do Not Disturb and the bedroom door flung open. I don't mean it just creaks open, I mean flung, as if someone had swung it open in anger. I jumped up and ran out the room, calling my boyfriend, freaking out. He calmed me down, and for whatever reason, I stayed in the house. And as a horror film fanatic, I now know this was a dumb move. It became time for bed, so I had to take the dog outside. She's a stubborn old thing, so I have to physically go outside and stand in the backyard with her, otherwise she won't go. Whilst we were outside and the dog was sniffing around trying to find her special toilet spot for the evening, I felt something. I don't know how to describe it, because I didn't actually see anything, but I felt something that looked like my mother at the end of the backyard, standing there looking directly at me. I know that sounds weird, but the feeling was so strong. People will always say it was your mind playing tricks on you, but it wasn't, because I've never before nor since had a feeling like that before. It was like I was seeing something without actually seeing it. I sensed it, and I sensed it strongly. She was in a nightgown, blonde shoulder-length hair, looking just like my mother, except cold and emotionless and angry. I rushed the dog back inside and went to bed, and needless to say, I didn't sleep very well that night. Whatever it was imitating my mother didn't like me. It never showed itself to my mum or brother, but for some reason loved tormenting me. This was until recently. I was over at Mum's for dinner, and the topic of ghost stories came up, and I brought up all the experiences I'd had at the house, and I found it so strange that Mum had never experienced it. Mum looked at me with a blank stare, almost as if she was trying to hold something in. "What is it?" I asked. "Well, the other week something happened," and she began to tell me the story, which finally made her realise that I was telling the truth. Except this time, it imitated someone else. Mum was out on the balcony with her friend having some afternoon tea. "Where's the bathroom?" her friend asked. "Just down the hallway," Mum replied. Her friend then got up to go to the bathroom, and from the balcony you can pretty much see everything from the house as it looks straight down into the hallway. My mum looked down eating her afternoon tea, and when she looked back up she saw her friend walk out of the toilet and into my mum's bedroom. Mum shouted, "What are you doing?" No response. Mum shouted a bit more, getting up from her seat to go and see why she'd gone into her room. Just as she was about to walk down the hall, her friend reappeared walking out of the toilet, and nobody was in the bedroom. I don't know what this thing is that imitates people at my mum's house, but I know it's not nice. It's not friendly, and it doesn't want me around. All I can say is, I'm glad I moved the fuck out. Never have I heard a more Australian ending to a story.
I'm just glad I got the hell out of there.
Fuck the family, I'm off.
No, that's I was thinking I'd love to see a ghost try and imitate my mother. I don't think there's any spirit that can handle that much kokanee light. As we've discussed many times, mimic shit. I both love and hate it.
It is odd. I mean, at the end of the day, Australia is a spiritual country. There are things there that the modern Australians either don't understand or don't appreciate. So things like that, I think, are the tip of the iceberg when you look at the stories of the Indigenous Australians.
And to sort of reinforce that, I found, as I mentioned, a number of these weird little towns from a Reddit thread. There's just places in Queensland that people think are odd, not necessarily paranormally odd, just odd. And I've got a few of them sprinkled throughout the script, but there's this one I wanted to share with you. Kanda. And Australian listeners, if we get any of this wrong, please just hold some mercy in your heart for your poor spooky uncles here. So about Kanda, people seem to say that most of the time in the daytime it's fine, but when it gets dark, it's not so welcoming. And one person said that him and his wife took the train up there, Lord knows why. And the friend of theirs, they're just about to go home, and a friend of theirs said, no, stick around. We will, we'll hang out. So they let the train go, and they said, I swear, as soon as that train pulled away, it was like a completely different town. I thought for sure we were going to get deliverenced. I saw someone on Twitter say they should remake Deliverance with everything a puppet except for Ned Beatty.
God. Well, I have seen Meet the Feebles, so it's not far away.
I was going to say, I guess that's not that far removed. Folks, ask your grandparents what that joke means.
What a disturbing film that is.
Yeah, it was funny. Nick was, she was listening to some podcast and she heard about Deliverance and she's like, I've never seen it, so I thought I'd watch it. I said, no, you've seen it. Have I? Yeah, it's the one where Ned Beatty. Oh, right. I kind of pushed that out of my mind, and I thought, yeah, that's what most of us do with Deliverance.
Yes, it is. I saw that film age 10. One of those moments where somebody thought, oh, it's a Burt Reynolds film. How bad can this be? Hour and a half later, a house full of traumatized children.
Yep, it'll get you every time.
Been terrified of banjo music ever since. I
think a whole generation of young men are terrified of banjo music as a result of this. But to further explore the deliverance-ness of Kanda, we have someone who said, I lived there for a while, and after 3 p.m., it was a ghost town. It was creepy as. Of the two pubs, I don't even know what this means. One closed in the Arvo. I don't know what Arvo is. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Arvo. One closed in the Arvo.
So one closed in the Arvo and the other closed at 7 p.m. The only thing open was the BP. I don't know what that is either. A taxi from Karen's I really did my research on this one. A taxi from Cairns was $100 minimum, so you couldn't have drinks after work. And pretty much everything gets eaten by mold. The wildlife was crazy with bush rats, goannas, pythons. Fuck that place. And the last one was some folks from Cairns who are about 30 minutes away. They spent a night at an Airbnb in Kanda. They said, we went into town for dinner and everything was shut except one pizza place. My partner went in to order and I waited in the car. The owner had a go at him, saying it was a locals only place and that he could make him a pizza, but he couldn't eat there. What an insane town.
I'll take your money, but you can fuck off.
Okay, that may be the most Australian statement we make on the show. Is that a thing? I guess there was that one bar I went to in Croydon where I think if I tried to order something, I may have been gently suggested to find another establishment. But is that a thing there? Because I've definitely experienced that in parts of America. But does it happen in Britain?
Not so much. I think there are places that can be very dismissive of tourists, maybe rightly in some instances, not treating the local customs or beliefs properly, or just treating the place as a party venue, and perhaps it's like a sleepy little village and stuff. So some places you've just got to be careful. But there's nowhere I'm aware of that if you went in a pub, they'd say, fuck off.
Okay. So I've never been told to fuck off going into a place, but I remember my friend Mike and I went to this little town in Arizona. I don't even remember where it was. It was a diner. We just wanted some breakfast. The place was hopping. The sign, as I recall, said, just come inside and grab a seat. We sat there for half an hour. First, we tried sitting outside on the deck. The waitress walked past us a dozen times, wouldn't even look at us. Then we tried sitting at the bar inside. The waitress in there wouldn't look at us. And I think it was after about half an hour, we thought, I don't understand what is happening here. And we just left. It wasn't like a skeezy kind of greasy spoon place. It was just a diner. But it was like we walked in there and suddenly we were ghosts. We ceased to exist.
Yeah, strange. I mean, I've been in places where people have come in and they stick out like a sore thumb and somebody has a quiet word with them and they go away. But
you say my giant pink foam finger may have been a deterrent to people getting over my table?
Maybe. Who knows? But no, it's not really a thing, that kind of... I mean, there's a big thing, strangely enough. Is it Stornoway? There's been a big story. Well, not a big story. There's been a story in the local news where the local community are up in arms that Tesco's is open on a Sunday, which is quite remarkable that you think there are places like that still in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I'm shocked that that's even a concern.
Yeah, as one of the new people that had moved there says, if I can buy a pint on a Sunday, why can't I buy a pint of milk? It's ridiculous.
I think that nicely illustrates the priorities of the British people.
Beer and scones.
Suddenly, your connection to the Australians is more apparent. Big man. The day before New Year's in 2006, I was making my way home from a friend's house on foot, sometime between 2 and 4 a.m. in a suburb about 40 minutes outside of Brisbane, Australia. It was a quiet suburb, mostly young families and oldies. I was walking along an easement/drainage ditch between two rows of houses that stormwater drains emptied out into, with a drop of about 2 to 3 meters from the level of the houses to the bottom of the ditch. The night was pretty bright. I think the moon was fullish and there wasn't much cloud cover. I had drank earlier in the night but had been sober for a good hour before setting out for home. As I walked along the easement, I moved from the narrow open part into the wider part, and moving from the slightly moonlit part into the shade of the trees made seeing ahead difficult, so I slowed down. I looked up from the ground to check the path ahead was clear, and I saw a man sitting atop one of the drainage pipes ahead, at about 20-25 meters. He was slumped forward and breathing heavily, and seemed pretty beefy, so I decided to move to my right and hug the fence line, to walk past him without interacting. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I could see he was lean and naked, and as I was sizing him up, he spied me over his shoulder, and quickly and silently dropped down into the cutout made for the pipe. This is when I noticed he was impossibly large. The pipe itself was about 750 millimeters in diameter, and the concrete around it made it to about 1.5 meters high, and his hunched over frame in the cutout looked like it would have barely come to his groin. This made my heart race, and I felt like this was going to end badly, so I sprinted for the nearest passage out of the easement to the road and turned around to check if he was following me. And he had, without a sound, made his way to the easement end of the passage with me on the road end, so about a standard block away from me. With the aid of the streetlights, I could see his skin was taut over his muscles. He had broad shoulders, but he looked emaciated. He was bald or had very short clippered hair with small ears, but other than that, his face just looked wrong. He looked like he had less facial definition than normal, like he'd been hit with a smudge tool with tiny eyes and mouth, and his genitals looked like they had been cut up with just sheets of ham hanging between his legs. It was dark, so my eyes weren't the best at judging color, but his skin looked too pale, almost gray. He was giant. The 1.5-meter fences flanking the passage that came to just below my shoulder were about the height of his crotch, and he just stood there staring at me motionless. It was the kind of look you get when a lion looks you in the eye through the glass at the zoo. I yelled as loud and as deeply as I could for him to bugger off, but he didn't flinch. So I ran until I was about 100 meters down the road and turned back. He wasn't there, but I didn't want to risk it, so I just ran the rest of the way home. I went back a couple of days later to check it out, and there was a fair deal of blood on the concrete, and I felt justified in my assumption that for him to be proportioned with a pipe as he was, he had to have been huge. He had a pretty normally shaped face, but his eyes were way too small and round, more like holes poked in skin than proper eyes. He didn't really have brow ridges, and his nose was kind of small and squashed flat to his face. His mouth was in a pretty neutral expression, but he didn't really have lips. It was again like his mouth was just a slit in his face skin, and I didn't get a look at his teeth. His face was really weird though, because while most of him was clearly defined, his face looked way too smooth. It is a pretty heavily treed suburb, and while where I saw him was a more built-up area, there are some bigger acreage blocks around, and some of them back into a pretty large woodland/bush type area. These areas are about 5 minutes walk from where I saw him. And I'll be honest, Paul, I thought this was just maybe like a person going through some kind of crisis, or maybe just a lunatic just hanging out outside. But the remoteness of the location, or relative remoteness of the location, struck me as odd. And the description of the facial features struck me as odd.
It's very peculiar because there are no indigenous legends in Queensland that match the description of that particular type of entity.
I mean, I guess they sleep better knowing that.
I mean, you would, like you said, you would think it perhaps was someone who may have been struggling with substance abuse, because obviously some of these remote locations in Australia are very similar to remote locations in the Americas where there is a real problem with crystal meth.
I didn't know that was an issue in Australia. I guess that makes sense, but...
Well, yeah, you've got millions and millions of acres with no bugger around you, so you can cook away to your heart's content if you can find the right location.
Makes sense.
And so you think you've got the explanation, and then you think, hang on a minute, well, that just doesn't look like a person. And it's too tall to be a person. And even if it was, why is that? Why are they been harmed in that manner? It's disturbing.
Obviously, I mean, if there's anything that's going to make me comment, it's going to be someone with weird looking junk. But the ham junked thing, I mean, that was strange. But then I wonder, okay, there's no good way to phrase this, but you wonder, how many penises have you seen? Do they all look like ham hanging from a distance? I don't know. I've not seen a lot of like just kind of random junk in the wild, so I don't know.
It's not really one of my specialized subjects, I have to say. Having played a lot of sports, I've seen more than my fair share, and that's all I want to say. Not after playing golf, by the way. I'd just like to clarify that.
Mind you, there are those golf clubs you can pee into, so I guess it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I tend to stick with the tried and trusted method of the nearest big tree.
That makes more sense. I think we've talked about the piss golf clubs before, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but I just feel like if you're using that, you just like the idea of peeing around people. This is like it's fulfilling a need for you.
There's no good way to do that on the tee.
Well, I wouldn't think so.
Hang on, lads. Get in the bushes, you silly sod.
Well, that's it, right? It's like, okay, now this is Bob's thing. I wouldn't even do that. I love my friends, but I would not support them in that particular thing. You want me to come to your recital, your terrible one man play? Fine. You want me to stand there while you get off whizzing into a golf club? Absolutely not.
No, and you don't want to be lunging that around for 3.5 hours.
Well, there's that too. Like, do you dump it? This is the thing.
It's pointless, isn't it? Because you probably might need another wee further round. Usually, if you play a round of golf, you usually need the toilet twice. Usually, because you're usually out there between 3 to 5 hours, depending on how annoying people playing around you are either in front of you or behind you. So sometimes you can be a lot quicker dependent on how busy you are. And so you would probably, if you need to go, you're probably going to need to go at some other points as well, especially if you're drinking a lot of fluids and you're exercising, so it tends to go through you a bit quicker. You'd have to empty it out and then do it all again. What's the point? Just run into the bushes. I mean, to be fair, the last time I played golf, I did that, ran in, got myself ready, just as a man and his dog walked past me in the middle of it. I was like, where have they come from? I could have got arrested for flashing.
I tell you what, you walk through the woods in a golf course, you have to be prepared to see some stuff. And if you're not, that's on you.
Absolutely.
Well, since we're completely off the subject of Australia, before we move on to the next section, I wanted to tell you the story that I didn't want to tell in the opening because I thought it would be a weird contrast with the thoughts of Howard. But I sit before you, Paul Bestel, as a man of science. Allow me to explain. So on the weekend, a friend and I drove into the city, and I had been told by one of our listeners about a tiki bar. And I won't say which for reasons which will become clear. The bar itself is fabulous. So I'm sure I will bring it up again at some point. Had many, many tiki drinks, which were lovely. I had more than my friend. My friend drove us home. But while there, in addition to our tiki drinks, they have some food. We had some Spam rice, which was really quite lovely. And they had crab rangoon. And now I have seen these on many memes. Many listeners have mentioned these crab rangoons to me. And I thought, well, you know what? I've had just enough rum that I'm willing to try just about anything. So I, Brennan Storr, human man, will try these rangooned crabs. And Paul, that was the worst thing I've ever put in my mouth. It tasted like a crab peed on me. It was the worst thing. I had two of them, because I thought the first one, I thought, this sucks. Maybe I'll try again. Try the dip. Nope, this is in fact worse. And I said to my friend, do you want to try it? She said, no, I can smell it from here. Absolutely not. So I just put my napkin over top of it, and the waiter comes by and says, oh, is there something wrong with this? I said, I don't think so. I said, I think I've satisfied my curiosity on this subject. And he took them away and I assume buried them in a salt mine along with all the unsold copies of that E.T. game where they'll never be found again. I don't know. It was the worst shit. Just horrible. So listeners, if you like crab rangoon, I love you, but I don't understand.
Have you ever eaten roll mop?
Yes. And I preferred
that.
Yes.
Jesus.
I liked roll mop. I thought those were okay. I like pickled food.
I like pickled food. I don't like roll mop. That's just like pickle on a different level of pickle. Two pickle.
One day, Paul Bestel, I hope you will join me out here on the frontiers of two pickle.
No, I've eaten proper roll mop in Norway. Never again. Oh. I had lots of other Norwegian food. It was lovely. Roll mop. No.
We're going to take a quick break for some ads. You folks go look up roll mop and maybe go get some from your local grocery store. You can thank or blame me later.
The Walking Man. I live in Ipswich, Queensland, a smallish but steadily growing town on the outskirts of Queensland's capital of Brisbane. Just outside of Ipswich, entering into Brisbane, is the suburb of Wakehall. Wakehall is home to the notorious Walston Park Mental Asylum. It's had a few different names before, but I now believe it's called the Park Centre for Mental Health, or something like that. I'd look it up to check. Now, this incident took place in 2002. I was with two of my cousins who are brother and sister, and our friends who were three other girls from our church. We're all Samoan and come from families who attend the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is more commonly known as the Mormons. So any talk about the paranormal is laughed off and quickly hushed up in our households. I'm no longer a practicing member of the church, but at that time I was 18 and still living at home, so I didn't mind going along to the church sermons or events with my family every now and then. That night in 2002, it was about 6 p.m, and my cousins had come over to my house to pick me up to go to a Mormon church dance for young adults. They held these dances quite regularly. It was a regional thing, and young adults from all around the region would attend. Anyway, the dance was being held in a northern suburb, which was about 45 minutes from Ipswich, and after my cousins picked me up, we made our way to the homes of our other three friends to pick them up as well. We get to the dance, mingle and catch up with our friends from other regions, and at about 11:30, the six of us decide that We've had enough dancing and partying and made our way to the car. The car that my cousins picked us up in was an old van that belonged to their parents, but one of the parents hardly used anymore. It was an old Mitsubishi, and at the very front where the driver sits was a 3-seater, so 2 of the 3 girls sat in the front with my guy cousin who was doing the driving. The second row of seats behind was occupied by myself and my girl cousin, and the very last row of seats sat our other friend by herself. We left the dance, but instead of going straight home, we decided to go for a drive into Brisbane Central, since it was so close to the chapel we'd just been at. We parked the van and went for a walk around the city. It was a lovely warm Saturday night, and walking past some of the nightclubs, we would see the security guards we knew standing outside the club doors and have a chat. None of us wanted to go into the clubs wearing our Sunday best, so we decided to grab some ice cream and head home. If you live in Ipswich, and especially back then, you couldn't go to Brisbane and back without having to go past where you turn off to go into the grounds of the Walston Park Hospital. Well, not if you wanted to go the quick way anyway. Armed with some McDonald's chocolate sundaes, we made our way to the car and headed back towards Ipswich. When we got near Wakehall, my guy cousin asks, "Do you guys want to check out Walston?" And it was almost 2 a.m. The 2 girls in the front with him were a little scared, but still said yes. His sister, who was sitting with me, rolled her eyes and dismissed what he was saying and just carried on talking to me about her boyfriend. Our friend at the back didn't say anything. I don't really think she cared what we did. And me, well, my attitude towards it was just, meh. I'd been to Walston Park many times before in previous years with friends, hoping to see something spooky, just like every other teen in the area did back then. I never saw a single scary thing, maybe except for the nude runaway mental patient being escorted back into the grounds by security, whilst the patient shouted every curse word under the sun at nobody in particular. The security staff would glare at us and tell us to leave, or we'd get done for loitering and trespassing and the like. Security was pretty tight there. They were either walking or driving around looking for thrill-seeking teens and driving them off the grounds immediately. But on this particular night, there was no one in sight, no little white security hatchbacks driving around with the high beams on, patrolling those grounds like there usually was. Back then, the grounds were still pretty old. They hadn't added the new buildings and all the new streetlights at this stage. It was still quite dark, and where the new buildings now stand, it was just overgrown with bushes and shrubs. We entered the grounds, and, as I said, it was dark, like pitch black. My cousin killed the lights to show us just how dark it was before his sister yelled at him to turn the lights back on and stop acting stupid. We drove further into the grounds, my cousin and I yapping away about some crap, while our friend at the back decided to lie down and have a snooze. Suddenly, my cousin driving yells, "Shit! Did you see that?" And we look over the trio at the front. The 2 girls are huddling up to each other, shaking and just saying, "Oh my gosh, who the hell was that? What's wrong with him? I want to go home." I quickly turned my head to look out at the back of the window of the van and could just make out under the moonlight a person who seemed to be walking with a limp following us. My cousin driving said they saw someone standing against the bushes on the side of the road who was just staring at the van as it went past. Because we were so busy chatting away, we didn't see this mysterious, spooky stranger. We thought it was probably just some homeless dude seeking shelter, or perhaps another adventurous patient, and just wanted to confirm what we'd thought. But when my cousin turned the van and drove back the direction we came, there was nobody there. His sister says, "See, I knew you guys were full of shit." But I tell her that I did see someone out the back window. She looked at me scared at the same time, and it was like, oh great, not you too. We kept driving that way to see if we could spot him again, and after driving a few minutes and not seeing anybody, which we thought was weird because I had seen him myself coming in our direction, and we should have seen him as soon as we turned around. But no, there was nobody there. We're driving around in the darkness, with the only light on we have is the dim lights inside the van. Suddenly, the lights fell upon a lone figure in the dark, his back turned to us. I just knew it was him. How the hell did he get here so fast, I thought to myself, and especially with that slight limp. He's just walking slowly on the grass by the side of the road, and he doesn't even turn to acknowledge the fact that there's a car behind him. I know I would have looked behind me if it was me at that time of night, in case the people jumped out and attacked me, so I knew whether I needed to break into a run or something. But not this guy. It's like we weren't even there. From looking at the back of him, I kind of sensed that something was not quite right here. His clothes were tattered and dirty and looked dated, like early 90s style when some guys were trying to dress like Nirvana and various other grunge bands. Something just seemed so off about this whole situation. Like, yeah, I get that we can see people anywhere wearing old tatty clothes, but there was just something about this that had a weird and scary feeling that I can't describe. I remember that he wore these light-coloured jeans and a flannelette shirt, or what remained of those clothes anyway, and seemed to be carrying a corduroy backpack, which almost looked like it had seen better days a very long time ago. He was Caucasian, and as we got closer, I could see that his matted blonde shoulder-length hair was clumpy, stringy, and just messy like it hadn't been brushed in a long time. Some of it seemed to be tied back in a low ponytail, and at the front he had more of this ratty-looking hair coming down the framing the front of his face, and he looked like he was in his early to mid-20s. We pull up beside him, and my girl cousin told her brother to slow down and stop. I think she was trying to prove that he was nothing scary. She scooted up to the window beside her and slid it down. And you know how those old van windows have those slide across to open windows instead of winding them down. And she sticks her head out and asks him, "Excuse me, are you all—" She didn't finish asking her question because by then he had turned around and was fully facing us. My God, I've never seen a living person who looked like that. She didn't finish asking her question because she slammed the window shut and just screamed her head off, and so did the two girls in the front seat. Just the loudest and most terrifying screaming I've ever heard in my life. I was freaked out too, but I couldn't scream as my cousin was pushing back against the window with so much force that she was actually crushing me against the side of the van. I couldn't even let out a little yelp. I remember that even though there was barely any light, his face stood out so much. Even though he was Caucasian, I've never in my life seen a person that colour. I've friends who are super pale, and even they look like they've spent a few hours in a tanning bed compared to this guy. He was white, but it was frozen white, if that makes sense. At the same time, he had this kind of bluey, purplish tinge about him. I think it was his bloodless veins showing through his white skin. It was so hard to put into words, although I could see him clearly in my mind. His eyes, the rims of his eyes, were just red raw, and the whites looked glazed over. He might have had light blue eyes, because you could sort of make them out underneath this milky film that seemed to be covering his pupils. They were lifeless, for a lack of a better term. That's the word that comes to mind when I think of them. He had these marks on his face, deep pink scratches that would have been bleeding but had since been washed. You know how in the movies when they pull those steel drawers out at the morgue so a person can have a look at the corpse? It was very much like that. In fact, no, it was exactly like that. My cousin screamed because when he turned to face us, that's when we realised he wasn't a typical living human face that we had looked at. He didn't say a word. He just opened his mouth and made this groaning sound. And then he began to extend a pale white hand towards the car, and we just sped off. There's a lot more to this story, but I know it's gone on too long, and I'm pretty sure you've probably stopped reading even after half of it. Now that I'm older, I feel terrible for the way we reacted and drove off like that, screaming like lunatics, but we were a bunch of kids and terrified. Now I wish we'd have been so much more calm about it and tried to speak to him. And being back in 2002, cell phones with cameras were still rare. In fact, most teenagers didn't even have a cell phone, so it's not like we could get a photo. I tried to search for any information related to this, but I sadly found nothing. I tried searching for things like missing people or unsolved murders around the area, but even if I did find his photo, I probably even wouldn't recognise him, as he didn't seem to look anything like the way he did that night. Was it a hitchhiker who had met with foul play? Was he trying to take a shortcut through Walston and came across a deranged patient? And if he was murdered there, is his body still buried out there somewhere never to be found? That place has an awful history.
So with that one, I was thinking, okay, so this might just be a person who is in need of help, a person who's in distress. But then they sort of described the face more. And I couldn't tell if that, was that an accurate description of the face, or were they just kind of gilding the lily to make it more spooky? But the fact that afterwards they had the thought that, maybe this person was buried nearby, maybe that's, I don't know. What do you think?
I think often you try and create a backstory to explain a strange experience, because At the end of the day, with the greatest respect, you drive around a mental hospital. So who knows? But it's that kind of like when they describe that milky film over the eyes and things like that. I mean, obviously that could be something as normal as a cataract, but then coupled with scratched faces and incredibly pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. So straight away, you know that's not somebody who suffers from albinism, because if they did, they wouldn't have blue eyes and blonde hair. They'd have white hair and pink eyes. So it's just a very odd description, but I suppose it's more shocking when you're young and you're in a situation where you're somewhere with a supernatural reputation and also a horrific reputation in the real world as well. Let's not fudge the issue. This was one of the most horrendous places for anybody to end up in Australia. It was awful. It's got a series of human rights abuses longer than a giraffe's neck.
Yeah. I found an article in Centenary today that has some details. So I thought for our listeners who don't know, I thought I'd fill you in on some of them. So it was opened in 1864 and closed in 2001. Now, that's one of the reasons I thought maybe there's something to this, because this would have been a year after it closed that they saw this. So it's unlikely to be a resident.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently, the way it's described in that Centenary Today article, graffiti-covered walls, rotting wood, and littered waste are all that remain of the decaying hospital that was once Australia's most notorious mental asylum. It is now a desolate and eerie sight often visited by urban explorers. Little of the abandoned structure remains intact, and police have warned that the building is dangerous. And yeah, as you say, more than 50,000 people passed through its doors during the course of its life, some of them as young as 11, and yeah, it has a horrendous record of human rights abuses. Again, this is according to Centenary Today. Former patients were often smuggled in by boat and crammed into conditions that resembled prison rather than a treatment facility. Survivors have come forward to tell of frequent sexual assaults by staff, electroshock therapy, and the force feeding of banned drugs. And that is beyond monstrous.
Sadly, I think you could visit any country in the modern world and you would look back at how they treated people suffering from mental illnesses, and in some places people who weren't suffering from mental illnesses that were classed as clearly you must be ill because you don't think like we do, therefore let's put you in somewhere and torture you until you decide to tell us what we want to hear. I think most countries have got very similar records in regards to this. And so, sadly, Walston is not unique in the way it treated its inmates. And that's a terrible, terrible thing. I mean, the other week we were talking about ice pick lobotomies, weren't we?
No, you're right. We absolutely were. And I mean, I do sometimes wonder what practices we engage in today will be looked at by future societies as being barbaric, you know? Actually, I just thought, I was kind of curious to get your thought on this. This isn't super spooky, folks, and we're going to get back to the stories here in a sec, but I was putzing around with my phone the way you do, right? I've switched over to Blue Sky pretty much full time. I was kind of still around on Twitter a little bit, just kind of farming content for the Instagram page, but all the cool people I know have decamped for places like Threads and Blue Sky, so I'm over there. I was thinking, I wonder if there's going to come a time where we're going to look back at the smartphone era the same way we have things like the opiate crisis or the opioid prescription crisis, where, you know, like there's this thing that serves a commercial function and, you know, has its own uses, because obviously opioids were, you know, they help with pain, but they were overprescribed and people became addicted. And well, I'm not equating it on a one-to-one level because it's not the same thing, but I do just wonder if one day we're going to look at what smartphones have done to everything else. Like, I really feel like the declines we've seen in attendance of live events, movies, all that shit. Well, I mean, to a certain degree, obviously money and inflation has been a part of it. I think people are just so involved in their digital lives because the phone is right there with an endless amount of content you never have to get up off your couch to interact with. I wonder if we're ever going to reckon with the damage they've done to every other industry, really not in the pursuit of anything good. What do you think?
I think if you watch They Live, that's a perfect example of the world we live in now. Consume, buy, fornicate. It's all we get told constantly. And obviously Carpenter's vision for that, that it was all subliminal messaging. We didn't realize everybody was being brainwashed. And we are now. I mean, you can read stories from every country all around the world, near enough every day, where someone has died being a dick on their phone. Like, how many people have fallen off mountains taking selfies or in front of trains and doing stupid pranks just to get some kind of traction online? And you look at the damage social media's done to people and the way we speak to each other and the way we respect people who are on the margins of society. It's completely decimated things for me. I think they are two of the most heinous inventions that have ever been created.
I don't think you're wrong. So we're on the same page here.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think we're at the fall of civilization point just yet. But
no, that's fair.
You can see the damage it does. I mean, I would hate to be a teenager now.
Oh, no, you couldn't pay me. You absolutely couldn't pay me. The dumb shit I did, not a lot of it, because I was a pretty mild kid, but, just you had the freedom to fuck up because it wouldn't follow you everywhere. I mean, if you did something really over the top, then obviously, yeah, like it would. Yeah. But, if you, some of the things, like, I used to drink a lot when I was a kid. Like I used to get sloppy, not when I was a kid, but it's in my 20s. I drank a lot. Like I went through a period of, was pretty sloppy drunk. And I'm lucky enough that all that gets memory hold because there's no videos, or the handful of videos that do exist are on my hard drive because they were taken with a handheld camera I had back then. Now all the dumb shit you say is just, it's held forever. And also you're so sensitive at that age. Like you're so malleable.
Yep.
Even if you don't think you are. And I really worry, especially about young men.
Yes.
And I mean, we're also by extension about young women, but I mean, I see a lot of the messaging for men and I hear so much bullshit being poured into their ears and given to them by the algorithm. It really bothers me. Like I subscribe to a couple bodybuilding YouTube channels and nothing crazy, literally just pure science information about, how to be an old motherfucker like me and not hurt yourself lifting weights.
Yeah.
And if I leave YouTube, it's like an unsupervised child. If I leave the algorithm to assign a video to me next, it's invariably going to be that venomous hack Jordan Peterson owning someone, with facts and logic. And it's the most nonsensical straw man bullshit. But that's what's getting poured into young men's ears. This bullshit is what they get instead of knowledge, instead of guidance. You just get these grifters and charlatans. And I'll say it right here. I know we got some people who listen who like Jordan Peterson. That guy's a piece of shit. He said 3 things that were useful once, which basically amounted to clean your room. And a lot of people gave him a free pass on that, but he's a fucking charlatan and huckster of the highest order. And he has damaged more young men's minds. That guy is a blight on society.
I never listen to anybody who constantly goes on about being cancelled whilst being on a national news broadcast.
Well, that's it. These guys are the saddest shit in the world. It's funny, actually. I've been listening to the book Nixonland by Rick Perlstein, and I have a hard time listening to it because I have to keep stopping because I get mad at the nonsense that was spewed back then to try and sway the electorate. Like the lies that were propagated, and it's so similar to now. Just panics made out of nothing. People who have no interest in messing with your life, suddenly you're told they're enemies, they're coming for you, and it gives you something to focus on instead of what you should be focusing on.
Capitalism 101.
Yeah, I guess it is.
The reason you're poor is not because of these rich people, it's because of these other poor people who have nothing. Hate them. Look, they look different. Don't hate us, hate them.
Yeah. Don't look at the goony South African billionaire behind the curtain. All right, we're going to get back to the ghost stories after these messages. In the club. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me about 8 years ago. I had just started working as a doorman for a nightclub/strip club. Before it was remodeled, it was a penthouse owned by an old rich recluse back in the late 70s. It was said she was murdered where the dance floor is on the 2nd floor. As soon as I started, I had a bad feeling about this place. But at first, I put it down to nerves at starting a new job. Nothing really happened for about a week, and I just about forgot the whole thing until closing time that night. We had just ushered all the patrons out, feeling tired after a long shift. Me and the manager sat down for a beer. After talking for about 5 minutes, a wine glass flew off the rack towards our table, smashing on the floor. The manager looked at me and said she must be pissed about something. I asked who he meant, to which she said, "The old lady." I just wanted to get out of there, but Not wanting to look like a coward, I just laughed it off, which to this day I regret. The next few days, she made it known that for some reason she did not like me there and wanted me gone. First, it started with me seeing her reflection in mirrors on the stage where the girls would dance. She would just stare at me with hate in her eyes. After that night, nothing happened for a few days. I thought she was done with me, but I was so wrong. There were a few small instances over the next few days, but this last is what made me quit, and I have never stepped foot in that place since. It was closing time, and after all the patrons left, the manager asked me to check the bathroom for stragglers. First, I checked the male toilets, and it was empty. After that, I walked into the female toilets, announcing who I was. I checked each stall, coming to the last one. I could see 2 feet. Thinking it was a girl who had drunk too much and fell asleep, I knocked loudly on the door asking, "Miss, are you okay?" After getting no reply, I got worried, thinking she may need medical attention. I barged the door in, and what I saw will be with me till I die. A woman standing there right in front of me. All I remember to this day is she had no eyes, and the scream she let out was ungodly. The manager found me passed out on the floor. He heard it as well. To this day, we both have trouble talking about it. And I didn't realize how much of a history Brisbane has of nightclubs.
It's a hot and happening nightclub scene there. It's been sort of the epicenter for that kind of thing in Queensland for decades.
Yeah, I had no idea. I found a link in the Brisbane Times to an article about a woman named Pauline Bell, who was a former club owner, and apparently she put together a whole book and art exhibit called Clubbed Out, A History of Brisbane Nightclubs from 1950 to 2000. And it sounds like a hell of a time.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, it's I mean, Australia often gets looked down its nose from countries that feel themselves to be more cultural. But culturally, they've always given us interesting music and singers and artists and actors and performances. So it's strange that they sometimes still get tarred with this brush of not really being with it when they have for decades, and sometimes even ahead of the curve.
So often I think when people react to stuff about, say, places like Australia, I think they're just reacting to this image they have in their head of what Australia is. This sort of almost like a combination of caricature and tour guide video or tour video, So like you've got this sort of the crikey shrimp on the Barbie, all that kind of bullshit. And then you've got, beautiful, the beaches and the sand. But I just don't think that they see it as almost like a theme park as opposed to a place where people live and kind of culture exists. I was actually thinking about this with, we had a comment on Instagram. It was a Full Metal Jacket meme. So at first it's got, the first panel is all the soldiers lined up. And then the next one is when the drill sergeant comes in. And it's about the Eagles should have taken the hobbits all the way to Mount Doom. And I had one of our regular commenters, she sent it a message and she goes, well, that wouldn't work because of Nazgul. It's a nonsense criticism of that plot point because it just wouldn't work, And I'm the first guy to admit I don't know a whole lot about Lord of the Rings, and I said this to her, I said, I think a lot of people just sort of base their criticisms of that scene in the film on even less knowledge than I have. I think they know even less about Lord of the Rings than I do. They're going off a memory of a meme of a memory of a meme, and with very little actual knowledge of the books. And again, I think that's probably true of Australia. I think you're going off a handful, like a Simpsons episode and Crocodile Dundee, and maybe some stuff you've seen about Steve Irwin.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a country that's obviously closely aligned with us because of how many Brits live there. Like we were joking last week when I was on about that show I was watching about missing people in Australia, and they'd say, right, let's speak to Brian, and Brian goes, why, this kid's gone missing in the outback. We got to go find him. What part of Brisbane's he from? I've never heard an accent like that. And I don't know. I mean, I know 5 people I went to school with live there now, and that's just me. So,
yeah, I know at least one of Nick's former coworkers in the police in the sort of the Bristol area. They moved to Australia roughly around the time Nick came to Canada.
Yeah, they've had a big drive because I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to remember Australia is as big as America and has a tenth of the population.
Which is a statistic that blows my mind every time. Like the scale of that is unimaginable.
You could put Britain in Queensland.
Yeah.
And people would still complain about the
weather. We can take the English out of Britain, but we can't take the British, the Britain out of the English. Going back to the story, though, I looked into it a bit. I suspect this is the Sun Building on Brunswick Street in Brisbane. It is home to a gentleman's club, the name of which I will not give here, just so we don't piss them off. But if you look it up, it is not hard to find. And I found this reference. Someone said, local drug dealer Heroin Phil was stabbed in the middle of a day at a drug deal gone wrong outside the church of McLaughlin Street. He stumbled up McLaughlin Street to Brunswick Street and died on the steps of the Sun Building. So even without the alleged history of, a wealthy former owner dying in their penthouse, which I wasn't able to substantiate, the place has a dark history.
Yeah, it does. But people have this romantic idea of places like San Francisco. And if you go looking for it, you can find just how dark the reality of San Francisco is.
But 100%.
But that's never shown to you unless you really go look for it.
I mean, I haven't been to San Francisco in a long time, but as I recall, it's one of those things where it kind of creeps up on you if you don't know where you're going.
Well, as with anything, reality is not the Disney version of a place you've seen.
Or a Simpsons episode, as the case may be.
Yes. I just remember at the end, there's a koala stowed away on their plane when they get evicted, because it obviously causes an international incident, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think they're evacuating in a helicopter, and I think there's something like that, and there's a koala on the skids, and it kind of keeps cutting closer and closer on the evil look in its eyes. Yeah.
I doubt there'd be an evil. I mean, I've yet to see if they've made a horror film featuring a koala, but you never know.
Well, there's one about the sloth.
Slaughterhouse.
Slaughterhouse, yeah.
So who knows? Maybe the guys that did Talk to Me, that's going to be their next film. Killer koala.
We can but hope. Just before we move on to our next story, I wanted to share another creepy Queensland town that I found a reference to. This is Marlborough.
Yes.
And so these are a few things that people have described as happening in and around Marlborough. One person says, I hit a kangaroo and I broke down near Marlborough, and the local farmer/weirdo, instead of helping, described in detail how he was going to shoot me through the door of the car. Very, very helpful, Exactly the kind of thing you hope for when you call AAA.
Brilliant.
And then there's someone else says, I second Marlborough. The servos in the area just give off huge creepy vibes, and the pub also had a very hostile vibe in general. Someone else says, the old Marlborough stretch of the Bruce Highway certainly had some eerie parts to it. It used to creep me out. On a couple of occasions, I've driven through some sort of entity that resembles small patches of fog that would make the hairs on your neck stand up. Someone else said, I've also heard this called the horror stretch. A lot of people were randomly murdered, apparently. One of the better known cases was a couple going to a skydiving event somewhere and had pulled up for a break during the night. Husband's body was found behind the wheel, and the wife's body was found a few days later, about 30 kilometers away, both shot dead. And then someone else mentions this, and this is kind of hilarious. I used to religiously pull into a little servo on that stretch and get a tank full of fuel and a feed. I did that probably 4 trips a year for 10 years. Then I pulled in there one night after my baby vomited with car sickness, and it was dark except for torches flashing. They had a fuse problem in the station. I said to the guy, sorry to disturb, but I just need a cup of water to wet a face washer. The guy raged out like a rabid dog and threatened to shoot us for stealing water. And a measured response to a totally reasonable request. And you'd think, okay, well, maybe this person's exaggerating, but about 5 other people went, oh yeah, I know which station that is. And every single one of them named exactly the same place. And you will be shocked to know it is no longer there. When I pull up to get my tank of gas, are they going to shoot me? Is not the sort of question that's conducive to a healthy long-term business.
Yes. It's very strange that Marlborough is described as a town.
How's that?
Because there's only about 150 people live there.
Interesting.
There's more people live on my street than that.
Well, I mean, some of the stories you've told me about your street also don't sound all that dissimilar from Marlborough.
The things you see late at night. It's very eye-opening. as I lurk in the shadows.
It's going to be our next show, The Things You See at Night.
Yeah, Marlborough's a weird place because it's famous for two reasons. One is there is no secondary school in Marlborough.
Okay.
The nearest one's 100k away.
Oh, my God.
So you either have to drive there every day or you go to boarding school or move. And I think they've got like a really weird gemstone there, which is really precious. I can't remember. It's not like a diamond, is it? A chromosphere or something? I'm not big on precious stones, but it's got a really rare precious stone there, which is why these people there. It's a mining town. It's got some big mines around it.
Right.
But still, it's basically on a road, and that's it. You drive through it.
There was a mining town that I didn't get around to mentioning because we got talking about that dipshit Peterson, but I found an article from the travel blog 43 Blue Doors, which wrote an article about bush camping in Queensland. On their second night in Queensland, they camped at the ghost town of Mary Kathleen. And apparently that was a planned settlement that served as sort of a base for the people working at the uranium mine nearby. And I guess there was at its peak about 1,200 people, literally the middle of nowhere, like 70 kilometers from the nearest settlement, according to this article.
Yep.
And I guess after the mine filled its last contract in 82, they just razed the whole town. So all that's left now are broken roads and concrete slabs. And I guess this couple, Trin and Bonnie, they set up on one of these slabs, and there's like a handful of few other campers around. Their night there, they heard this terrible, mournful cry. They said sounded like a tortured soul, and scared the shit out of them. Turned out to be a curlew. Yeah, just a bird.
A very cute bird.
They are indeed.
Weird
but
looking.
The reason, I feel like most birds are weird looking as far as I'm concerned.
Most birds in Australia are.
Yes. Actually, is it what's the one, the giant ass one that looks like an emu or an ostrich?
The killer bird?
Yeah.
Cassowary.
I saw a clip and I forgot to send it to you, but someone got a video of a cassowary just walking down the beach, and it like got right up in someone's face and was just kind of looking at them, and the person looked suitably terrified, as they should.
They can kill you.
And it looked like it would not take much effort. This thing looked like a dinosaur.
Yeah, there's loads of brilliant clips of people who've gone hiking in Australia and they've stumbled across a cassowary guarding a nest, and they just chased.
Oh, God.
Because you've got to watch them because they've got a massive claw on their foot and that can disembowel you.
Jesus Christ.
It will kill you instantly. And they are fast, and they've got a thick, like a bony cleft on their head, so they can knock you unconscious. They nut you as well. They're stunningly beautiful birds. They are gorgeous. They are incredibly deadly, as most wild animals are if you put them in a situation. But if you're dealing with a 6-foot baby dinosaur with a killer club and a thick skull that can run at like 35 miles an hour, you're in trouble. Beautiful eggs.
Interesting.
I think they're bright blue or green. They're stunning cassowary eggs. If you see a picture of a cassowary egg, you will have to check it's real, because you can't believe a bird would lay an egg like that.
Oh wow, those look like they look like Easter eggs, like the kind of thing you buy you would paint.
Yeah, like a Fabergé.
Yeah, exactly.
They're beautiful.
God, imagine what kind of omelets those things would make. Anyways, that's probably not helpful. Cassowaries writing down my name on a list.
There was a guy killed the other year. Was it in America? There was a guy kept one on his ranch or something, killed him.
World's most dangerous bird kills 75-year-old man in Florida. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. This is from ABC News. This is dated April 14th, 2019. A 75-year-old man was attacked and killed by a large exotic bird he kept as a pet on his property in Florida, known to experts as the world's most dangerous bird, authorities said. Well, yep, there we go. Marvin Hayos died from injuries suffered in the bizarre attack by a cassowary, a flightless fowl with knife-like claws that can stand up to 6 feet tall and weigh more than 100 pounds, according to officials. Hayos was in his property in the Gainesville suburb of I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, when he apparently tripped and fell at about 10 a.m. The cassowary, which looks similar to an Australian emu, then pounced on him. Oh, wow. So imagine that. This bird hates you so much that it just sees you fall down and it goes, well, now's my chance.
Yep. Yeah, they don't look anything like an emu, other than they're slightly blue. They're very different looking birds.
This is reporting in Florida. We have to grade it on a curve.
Oh,
they spelled bird right, so.
I didn't think it was that long ago, actually. I thought it had happened a couple of years ago.
I mean, if you told me another person had been killed in the intervening years somewhere in Florida by a cassowary, sure, I'd believe you.
No, that definitely sounds the story I'm thinking of. I thought he was in his 70s and it was a pet. It's like these people who keep alligators as pets. Yeah,
No.
I know how that story ends.
You're the pet.
I mean, they're just incredible, but very dangerous.
This has been the Cassowary Guys.
Ah!
And just going quickly back to the Mary Kathleen, that uranium settlement. Apparently, the water there is completely saturated with uranium. So there's just these bright blue pools of water.
Beautiful till you get in.
Yep, exactly.
Come for a swim and leave your skin behind.
All your worries will go away along with everything else.
Come out looking like Dr. Manhattan. Almost Stuck from Millie. My name is Millie, and I want to start off by saying I'm a huge fan of the podcast and I've been listening for quite a while now. I've wanted to write in with a personal story before, but I didn't really know what story to tell you guys up until recently. I've had many vivid and lucid dreams in the past, but nothing quite like this one. So it started that I was walking through some airport gates, and there was a girl, we'll call her P, that prior to her falling out, I used to be good friends with, waiting at the gate for me. She linked arms with me and told me she misses me, and I said that I missed her too, and I was hoping we could talk, as I felt that the reason for a fallout was really stupid, and I'd like to just talk things out. As we walked out of the gates, we walked right onto a beach, and P told me that she would take me to sit with her and her friends. I asked her if that would be awkward considering we weren't friends anymore, and she reassured me that it would be fine, so I agreed. When we got to the group of girls, I greeted everyone and vice versa, and she started talking about something, and I don't remember exactly what, because the whole time she was talking, I realised that I didn't have any of my stuff with me. My phone, clothes, any money, etc., and I kept trying to tell her that something fell off because none of my stuff was with me. Meanwhile, all the other girls were having their own conversations that I couldn't hear. Suddenly I said, "This is a dream." And as I said that, everyone whipped their heads in my direction and stopped talking. P looked at me funny and said, "No, you're not dreaming, you're just on the Gold Coast, so it feels like a dream, but you're not dreaming." I shook my head at her and said, "No, something is off. I don't have any of my stuff with me. I must be dreaming." She tried to reassure me again that I wasn't dreaming, but then I stood up and said, "No, I'm definitely dreaming." And I turned around to leave. As I turned around, the scene of the dream changed from the beach to the high school I used to go to as a teenager. I then knew I was definitely dreaming. I started running through the school, and as I was running, I woke up and heard a voice to me saying, "Good thing you woke up or you would have been stuck in that dream." And then I woke up in real life. That's the creepiest dream I've had by far. There's been lots of dreams where I've realised I was dreaming and I've told myself I need to wake up. But what creeped me out about this dream and what I've never experienced before was that P was trying to reassure me that I wasn't dreaming and tried to keep me sitting there with her. And then the voice that I heard telling me, "Good thing you woke up or would have been stuck in a dream." That voice just sounded so sinister and yet so nonchalant. I truly believe that if I'd not realised I was dreaming, that I could have died in my sleep or something.
Thank you, Millie. It's really interesting. And obviously it's only sort of tangentially related to Queensland, but I love stuff like that because we've had before on the show this phenomenon of there being like a liminal voice between like real life and dream life that sort of functions almost like a Greek chorus.
Yeah.
After a fashion. And I think we might even had that was sort of the Prison of Sleep episode we did with that one really lengthy dream where that fellow felt like he was trapped and couldn't wake up. I feel like there may have been that there as well. And I know a friend of mine had a very vivid dream sort of involving this liminal hotel space where there seemed to be sort of a vocal intermediary that she couldn't see but was speaking.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously very enmeshed in sort of paranormality as well, because you've obviously got the incidents that occurred with that population of young men from South Asia who moved to the States. And there was that sleeping sickness that seemed to affect them. They were all dying in their sleep, which is what the second season of The Terror's based on.
Right. Isn't that also, that was the Hmong people?
Yes.
Yeah. That was, I think Wes Craven was partially inspired by that to write Nightmare on Elm Street as well.
Yes. Yeah, it's got its tentacles in inspiring a lot of modern horror things, but and that's just a very weird sort of genetic thing. So it is strange, I think, when we talk about young people who pass away for no reason in their nights, and it can sometimes lead us into strange and dangerous waters.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago, back when Nick and I were couch surfing hosts, we had this couple actually from Harrogate, and I remember
very
we went
nice.
Yes, we went out for dinner at a pub, and we got talking about something like this, about a young boy who had just died in his sleep, but of no discernible cause. He had, they had autopsied him, and it was just like he just stopped living. And I do wonder if there is some, if it's not impossible, this could be like a situation like that. Obviously not like you're in that kind of danger, Millie, but you do wonder, is there something happening where some people are just, for whatever reason, they lose that battle in their head, they get stuck, whatever it is, and it has a real life cost.
Well, you never know, do you? Because obviously most of us have experienced that sensation of falling in our dreams and the bang that wakes us up, which is one of the most terrifying things I think you can have in a dream. And
I know as a kid, the urban legend that we were taught was, of course, if you hit the ground, you die. Yes. Which is obviously not true, but...
Yeah. How would you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's 100%.
Did he hit the ground? I don't know. He's dead.
No.
Oh, he must have hit the ground then.
Can't die if you're just falling. That's just science.
See, back to Jet Set Willie again.
Yeah. I still not totally convinced that's a real thing. Although I went and found, if you look at the cover for the last Talk Spooky, I did find the covers for Attic Attack and Nodes of Yesod.
See, they are real.
Allegedly. You had time to plant those.
Pulled them from the dark web.
Yeah, exactly. So what is the tie here with Jet Set Willie?
Falling constantly. When you got the cheat code, there's a certain level that if you did it wrong, you would just fall forever until you got really annoyed and turned the game off.
I mean, that's why I stopped playing the Avengers PlayStation game. Fell through a bridge, kept falling, and I thought, nope, I didn't save it for a while. Fuck this.
God, I've got to do 2 chapters.
Yep, not happening.
That's why autosave is our friend.
Well, you'd think, right? That game had a lot of problems.
Yeah, they've cleaned it up a lot since. But yeah, lucid dreaming is something that I just find fascinating because I've never had any experience of that kind of thing, and I'm not really sure I want to with some of the things bouncing around my head.
I've heard so many stories of people who can control it.
Yeah.
And I can't seem to, even when I'm aware I'm dreaming, I can't seem to affect that change. I don't know what it is. Like, I've got a friend who they'll tell me, like, I had a nightmare and I realized it was a nightmare, so I just switched it up. And I genuinely, I don't know how to do that. Again, I've been aware it's a dream, and maybe I can change some things sometimes, but sometimes things will actively resist. And it's almost like there's not that I actually think there's an entity there, but there'll be something else that's just going, no, we're not doing that. No, this is the dream. And which I find bizarre. Because no, you work for me, you son of a bitch. Just change.
I did have a weird dream the other week that I was living in a cabin somewhere, and I was friends with some bears, and I was talking to them. We were talking bears.
That sounds pretty sweet. I remember reading an interview with Christopher Walken. He said when he's not working, he just stays in his house in the country and watches TV, where he says, "My best friend is bear." So perhaps you just dreamed you were Christopher Walken. Actually, speaking of weird dreams, just before we move on to the last story, I had a weird one the other night. I actually got to bed early, which every time I do this, it just fucks me because I end up having a nightmare. I had a hell of a time getting to sleep. Finally got to sleep. And I had a dream where I came home to my apartment, which looked kind of like my apartment here in London, just a little different. And there was a white leather ottoman in front of me, and behind that, a recliner. And I remember at one point being scared, and I couldn't figure out why I was scared. And then I realized the ottoman, or the recliner, was creaking, and like the lower part was starting to extend. And I remember thinking, oh, that's weird. I wonder why it's doing that. Didn't think too much of it. But then I realized that on the ottoman in front of me, on the white leather, there was a red bloody handprint, like a palm print. And that's when I noticed that the chair was extending because it had been knocked askew. And as I had the realization, a closet door next to the recliner opened up, and a man and a woman stepped out. And then I woke up. Scared the shit out of me. And when I woke up, for some reason, my window, I'm on the 3rd floor, but for some reason, my window faces a school that has a very powerful spotlight in the yard.
Was it Wayne High School or something? What's going on there? Why has the school got a spotlight?
I genuinely don't know, but it points towards my direction. And so on windy nights, you'll see on the wall, my front door, you'll see these moving, they look like fronds, and it's a shadow of a tree. But if you look out the window, you think, well, Jesus Christ, there's no trees anywhere nearby this building. What the fuck is going on? And then you realize it's because they're in the schoolyard on the next block over. But that night when I woke up, I don't know what was in front of the spotlight. I never figured it out. I don't think this is paranormal. I think this is just a funny coincidence based on my dream. But the shadow projected on my wall by the spotlight looked like someone leaning on my windowsill with their arms crossed. And I nearly shit a brick. I had to panic, tell myself, no, Storr, you live on the 3rd floor. You live on the 3rd floor. This isn't Salem's Lot. There's no one floating outside your window. Man. Thing in the cane. When I was a child, I would get sent to my grandma's house on school holidays. She lived directly across from a sugarcane field. My uncle and cousins lived in Innisfail, where my uncle would leave my cousins at our grandma's house as well so we could play. We regularly played in the cane field. When the cane was fully grown, we would play hide and seek, tag, or race each other through it, often with our arms up protecting our faces. A few times we thought we could hear someone else running with us. One day we were walking through the cane talking about nothing important when we thought we saw another kid in the distance. We called out to them and they looked at us. When we got closer, we saw it was certainly not a person, but a bizarre and pale-looking humanoid thing. It turned to us, not necessarily in a threatening way, yet we didn't know what it was, so we took off. A few days later, Grandma went to work one evening, leaving my cousins and I home alone. One of my cousins went outside for some reason, but came back crying. We asked her what was wrong, and she said there was something crouching behind the wheelie bin, growling at her. So we all decided to go check it out, of course, and the thing was there again, but you could see it better. I could see it was really skinny, had abnormally long arms, basically the hands went past its knees, it was hairless, had no genitals or nipples, but it was naked, sort of like a sickly Ken doll. It had a nose that was basically 2 slits like Lord Voldemort's. It had big but purely black eyes with no white. A long face, what I'm assuming to be a mouth, yet it was just like a line on its face where a mouth should be, and it sort of had these long fingers that were gripping the side of the bin. The reason we got such a clear description of the thing was because it was poking its head out from behind the bin to stare at us. We decided to throw things at it and near the bin to see what it would do. Yep, sounds like kids. It made a growling, screaming noise like an angry cat, but deeper, then stood up. It wasn't very tall or big, possibly a similar size to my cousins and I, who were 10 to 12 years old at the time. It then turned around, crouched down, and then ran/bounded away on all fours back into the cane field. We told our parents and Grandma, who just made a joke about it and ultimately didn't believe us. My cousins and I no longer played in the cane field. Several months later, in the new year, I was sent to Grandma's house again for the school holidays, and my cousins were dropped off there too. One night we were in the back seat of our Grandma's car. Grandma was driving while my uncle was in the passenger seat. While Grandma was reversing out, we all saw a thing crouching in the grass near the cane field. It was illuminated by the car lights. Our Grandma and my uncle thought it was a person, so Grandma pulled up, and our uncle rolled down the window to ask if they were okay. It then lay down flat and straight and put its face up. My uncle immediately rolling his window up. It was the thing again, but this time instead of running or bounding away, it sort of slithered/shuffled backwards into the cane field while staring at the car and laying down. My uncle and our Grandma went quiet while driving, then pretended it never happened. The last time I ever saw it was when a cousin and I were sitting on a ledge in Grandma's yard around sunset. We'd been talking for probably an hour, and I felt as if we were being watched. However, there was no eerie feeling. We suddenly stopped talking and turned our heads to just see it standing there, sort of poking out of the cane field, basically openly watching us. We weren't sure what to do, but my cousin moved his hand up and down almost like a wave, and it moved its hand similarly, but still had its arm down and did it side on. Then a car came along and it darted back into the cane. I have no idea what it could have been. It seemed to want to watch us more than anything, though despite its abnormal appearance, it didn't seem malicious. We have no idea what it was, where it came from, why it was there, if it would do anything to us. We also couldn't talk to anyone about it because you'd certainly get made fun of or thought to be crazy. 5 people saw it. My cousins and I certainly saw it more than once, and it seemed to be mainly around when the cane was high. So, I don't know, Paul, that one almost sounds, one of the things I've seen pop up as a potential explanation is something called a walker. I think walker is the word, or crawler, pardon me, it's a crawler. They've referred to the thing as a crawler, which to me just sounds like a creepypasta thing, but maybe you know better than I?
I would defer to a gentleman called Nate Brislin, who wrote a book a couple of years ago focusing on reports of crawlers from around the world.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
They're very similar to what's known as the rake, basically.
Right.
Sort of elongated, pale-skinned humanoids that don't quite look human enough to be human, as though they're trying to assimilate, but they can't quite get the mixture right or whatever. Because it's another strange thing, because once again, this is not something in Indigenous Australian law, especially in Queensland, because as with the tribes and nations of North America, you have tribes and nations of Indigenous Australians. So they all had similar beliefs, but the tribes that inhabited the area that is now Queensland did not have a creature of that ilk.
The rake was another thing that, again, I thought was a creepypasta and purely a creature of creepypasta, but then I recall a listener telling me that's not the case.
I think the rake that was through creepypasta was based on some other stories that you can go back and find some of these strange reports from sort of the 90s and stuff. It does predate creepypasta, but the version that seems to be more popular now is purely the one that was on creepypasta.
I understand.
So that's kind of taken over the actual original story.
Right. Interesting. It does make me wonder, if there is something that is trying to look like us, and we've seen the ones that don't work out, like this one. You wonder, are there ones that did work out? Are they some of these people we've seen kind of floating around who just don't seem to have a whole lot going on behind the eyes?
Yes, yeah, I do. I mean, it's surprising as well, because Queensland's got enough weird stuff going on without people adding to it, I mean, it's a Yowie hotspot. You've got a haunted theme park. You've got Min lights reported around there. UFO sightings all over Queensland.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a crazy place. Min lights, I love stories. Min lights are quite spread around Australia. It's quite a well-known thing. They're not specifically in Queensland. There's a lot of reports from New South Wales and the Northern Territories and stuff. But I've actually spoken to a first-hand witness who was chased by the Min lights.
Really? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, they went to the beach and they'd had a nice barbie and beers and chilling out. And then they saw some strange lights bobbing about. And the lights seemed to notice them and started approaching them. And they were a bit like, this is a bit strange. Got in the car. And then they were chased by the Min lights for about 30 minutes.
Oh, wow. So like the cassowary in the video you showed me that we'll have a little bit in the outtakes. It kept pace with them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But they had the feeling that it could catch them at any point if it wanted to. They felt as if they were being played with.
Oh, like it was a game. Yeah. Fascinating.
And I've also spoken to somebody who told me a story about being abducted by aliens when they visited family in Queensland as well.
Really? I would love to know more about that as well.
They were taken out the window in the middle of the night and floated out and into a ship where they were experimented upon and probed and
oh God,
stuff, and then they were floated back in through the window.
Jesus Christ. So do you think it was a physical... I assume you believe that to be credible.
I do, because the person who told me it has no interest in that field whatsoever.
Oh, fascinating.
And only told me because he knows my brother and he knows that I wouldn't scoff at him if he told me his story. 90-year-old men don't usually make stories like that up. I mean, there was a very famous, I think that happened in Queensland a few years ago, where two railway workers discovered a boar that had been ripped in half.
Oh my God.
Like ripped in half in the middle of it, surrounded by a giant footprint.
So that's got to be Yowie.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
But yeah, there's a lot of Yowie reports. On the board, basically, there's like a massive area of parkland out there, forest, that kind of spreads from Queensland down into New South Wales, and that is Yowies all over the place. That particular side of the country, that is the Yowies stomping ground. But obviously, it's a very lush, it's got essentially a massive rainforest running around most of that part of Australia down the east coast.
Right. Which is, I don't think something people know about Australia generally, that it has that kind of biosphere.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. Some of it. You look at the is it Blue Mountains down there? I mean, it's just stunning. If you have the chance to watch the Yowie documentary Track, that's all out there and very strange and very weird. Okay. And you look at that particular area and you wouldn't know you were in Australia, to be honest. You'd think you were in the Pacific Northwest. And
that's something I didn't know about it. I had no idea that it had that kind of range of topography.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an incredible, like I say, people always think of Australia as just being hot and beaches and then very arid desert, but it's got lush rainforests, very temperate areas where you've got to be very careful. And certainly, everybody thinks about Australia, and we, like we were joking last week about somebody saying, "Oh, he's wearing shorts and it might get down to 8 degrees." 8 degrees here at the minute would be a bloody godsend. But Australia is a country of extremes, and this is the thing. Sometimes people think that if you're stuck in the middle of the desert, then you're going to die through the heat. But usually, you can freeze to death at night because the temperature change is just incredible. You're more likely to get hypothermia than sunstroke, depending on when you find yourself stuck out there. It's a big country. People get lost all the time. Well, say lost. Something might just take them home.
Yeah, a cassowary.
I'm trying to remember the name of... There was a really weird case that happened off the coast of Queensland about 15 years ago, where 3 best friends took their boat out like a lovely little yacht for a bit of pleasure cruise, a bit of fishing, a few beers, chilling out. All 3 of them vanished. They found the boat, but they've never found them. And it's one of them where they've gone. I think when they got there was like half drunk cups of coffee in the bow and things, and there was on the deck. So it looked like somebody had been sat there and they'd all gone. And I think they came out that it's one of those, oh, well, one of them fell in and then somebody tried to help him and he fell in. And then the other one came to rescue him and he fell in and then the boat went away. And so basically all 3 of them fell in. It's like Flannan Lighthouse. It's one of those. Well, we're not really sure what happened, but we think all 3 of them fell. We've no proof of that, but that's the only thing we can think of. And this was it. I'm trying to think. The boat was called something really weird, like Kaz or Kez or something. But yeah, it was like a mystery. It was just found bobbing about on its own, and that's when they realised they'd disappeared. But I don't think it was found till like a week after they'd vanished. And they've never found it hiding a hair of them.
Interesting. Well, on that note of enduring mystery, we bring our Queensland episode to a close. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114. However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories. He's also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available everywhere podcasts live. Brody Daniels, who sometimes helps us find our stories. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community. She's also co-host of the Streaming into Madness podcast with Walter Whitaker. Our paranormal conductor in our journey into the supernatural is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And of course, my friend, my co-host, is the one and only Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I return to the world of ufology in the company of the marvellous Insha Fitzpatrick, who joins me to talk about her latest book for young adults, and we dive into the world of UFOs and aliens and dance around some of the stranger aspects of that particular topic for a younger audience, perhaps, before entering the mysterious world of the Banshee with Stephen J. Rolfs as we discuss these weird portents of death from around the world.
Oh, fantastic. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media networks and podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm largely the truth on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. You can find my horror fiction show, Fear Daily, everywhere fine podcasts live. That is a daily horror fiction podcast written by myself and narrated by Brandon Scheck Snyder of Southern Gothic. As we said at the top of the show, we can only do this because of our patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers. And if you would like to help support us, follow the link in the show notes or sign up at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or GST Premium via Apple Podcasts and YouTube, where you will find bonus shows, extra conversations between me and Paul, our monthly live show, and also our Ghost Force shoutouts every second story episode, where you get to hear your name in the show. Again, you can get all of that by signing up via the link in our show notes or at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys and Ghost Story Guys Premium on both Apple Podcasts and YouTube. If you want to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We have t-shirts, mugs, stickers, all kinds of cool stuff. And again, that's all available at ghoststoryguys.com. Do us a favor, make sure to rate and review the show. You can comment on Spotify, rate us there, rate us on Apple Podcasts. If you see someone saying, hey, what's a good podcast to listen to, make sure to mention Ghost Story Guys. We are always looking for new listeners. Our theme song is Radio, Into the Darkness We Go. It is performed and composed by Peter Kursov of Podzonta Music. Find more from him by searching for Podzonta Music wherever you get your tunes. They are streaming courtesy of Night Harvest Recordings, the Ghost Story Guys house label. And I guess that's going to do it.
Oh, I've just got one thing to say to you.
Oh.
Why do Australians love barbecue so much?
Why?
Because they're brilliant. We'll be back next week, hopefully. But until then...
Into the sadness we go.
And she began to tell me the story, which found... Hang on, one of the cats. Can you hear that dingling? Yeah. There's a cat.
The ghost of Steve Irwin just ripping off penises.
What's that, Skippy? You want me to pull somebody's cock off? Righty off, kid.
We've had the pokeroo conversation, yes?
Yes.
I dropped that one on Nick a while back. She's like, the fucking what? The pokeroo.
Get Jason Momoa, pet.
That costs extra. I'm too cheap for that.
Jesus Christ, hang on a minute. I've completely lost the ability to speak. Since that sneeze, I've just gone.
Just blew all your brains out.
Maybe except for the nude runway mental. That was a bit of a change of tact.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can now, yeah. We hit a wall there. Can I get you to start from the top?
No.
Fine then.
I'll do it through the medium of dance.
Well, now I'm looking forward to it. Hang on, I'll start a beat. He doesn't need any beat. Look at him go. Amazing. Like waves on the river Styx.
I could have been in breakdance. Electric
Telling
boogaloo.
you. There's still time, Paul. Your back's sealed up.
I'm getting there. Just get me some lino, I'm off.
Done deal. All right, Paul has sent me a video of cassowaries attacking people. So let's watch this quickly here. Yep, those are big bird. Oh, Jesus. Yep, I'd back away quickly too. Holy shit. It's like Jurassic Park, just chasing that truck. Holy shit, he's keeping up, dude. That's horrifying. Oh, he doesn't stop. Holy Christ. That truck bed would be overflowing with my fear shit. He just keeps coming. Good God. What else we got here? A shirtless guy being menaced by one. Yep. They just look mean. Just
it's that giant cone on their head.
Yep.
That's solid, that.
Yep. Keep backing up, buddy. Get into the water and just make a new home at the bottom of the sea.
You're incredible.
Well, the guy in the motorbike. He's like, is this the last day of my life?